Okay, good. The recording is going. Okay, so everybody, what I've done is I've shared my screen. You should be able to see about 25 or 20 thumbnails here. These are all the sessions, and some of them are backup sessions that we've had. These are the sessions we've had so far. So I think this is session number 17 or thereabouts. And what we do for these sessions is we choose a fairly constrained topic so that we can discuss it in somewhat detail. And then over time, we've got I think about 30 topics defined that we're going to cover in these sessions. So, it is a kind of constrained topic for this particular session. What I'm going to talk about today is methods where you can actually create scatter plots on top of images. So, we've talked about scatter plots before, which are plotted on X, Y, Z axes. And every once in a while, we come across somebody who's got a use case where, hey, instead of just putting this on with no backdrop to the XYZ axis, they want to create a scatter plot on top of an image. So I've got three example use cases I'm going to go through today. I'm going to go through them all in the edit mode rather than in the present mode, so we can see what's going on in the flow editor as I talk about each of these. So, and the technique for each of these is very similar. Basically, what you need to do if you're going to be plotting data onto an image is you need to identify what the XYZ coordinates are going to be, and then you plot the data. So Flow thinks it's plotting data on an XY plane. And actually what you've done is you've put an image on that plane. So Flow is actually plotting the data onto the image. So this first example use case has to do with generating a scatter plot for occurrences of events on a graphic of the human body. So the first thing I did here is I went searching for a public domain chart of the human body. And I got one here that's been in the public domain for quite a while. This drawing was done by Leonardo da Vinci somewhere around the year 1500. So it was kind of an advanced drawing of the human body at the time. And this is the image on which I'm going to plot occurrences of events on the human body. Everything I'm putting on here is artificial data, and it's small data sets. So rather than concentrating on nuances of the data, we can concentrate on how we get that data onto the image. So on this first, for this human body, what I've done here is the very first thing I did is I just identified 45 data points around the human body that could serve as targets for occurrences of maybe it's pain or drug treatment effect, or whatever. So these are the 45 places I've identified on the human body. This one here is the body location, the top of the head, and it has an XY coordinate of 108 by 206. So 108 is my x-axis, 206 is my y-axis for this particular plot. Okay, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit here. You can barely see the x-axis here. The y-axis a little bit more visible. Okay, so if I would take a look at the data set for this particular swarm, I'm gonna click on the swarm here. Just I know some of you are not have not really used the flow editor much. So what I'm doing here is I'm navigating to the data by clicking on the swarm definition here. And this is swarm 2 on step 3. And I'm going to come over here. I'm going to take a look at what's in this data file. Very simple data file. So here's the body part. Okay. I also have I have the top left corner, top right corner, bottom left corner, bottom right corner. Those aren't really body parts, but they are places on this chart. So the top of the head, I mentioned that was 108, 206. And I go down all the way from the top of the head to the right bottom of the foot. And that's it, that coordinate 65 and 6. Okay, so very simple data set. It's got 49 records in it. And, you know, this is what I'm going to do to map my occurrences. And the data that I'm getting on the occurrences has to do with the identification of the body part. So, you know, I'm going to say here, I got an occurrence on the chin. I got an occurrence on the neck. And what I'm doing here is I'm using these coordinates here to translate neck to what the flow scatter plot wants to think in terms of, which is XY coordinates. So this is a kind of a table file that I've set up. It's a table, let's say an Excel sheet or a Google Sheets sheet, but it's a table, basically a table file that's going to allow me to map occurrences to places in the XY space. Okay, so this is my setup. Let's see, just when you do this, you have to be pretty careful about alignment of the XY coordinates versus the image, and you got to make sure you put your image where you say it's going to be in terms of the XY coordinates. So I was pretty careful in my setup of this chart. And I made the chart width 1 meter. I made the chart height 1.334 meters, which is the dimensions of Leonardo's drawing here. The width range, I said that's going to go from 0 to 200. That was arbitrary. I just chose that. And the height range 0 to 208. So the image position, I've been careful to position this image so the center of the image as it positions 0, 0, 0 in the 3D space. Okay. My chart position, I have that position in basically exactly the same position. I have the chart offset a little bit on the Z-axis, just so I make sure these dots are fully visible to me above the image rather than slightly behind the image or exactly on the image, in which case only half of the dot would be visible. Remember, we've got a 3D space here. So I've got to be careful about, you know, where I position my dots. So at least I have the top half of the dot fully visible. So it looks like it's fully there. Okay. So anyway, this is all set up. If I go to the next step, things will start to take shape here a little bit. Okay. So here I've got some example data, and I'm involving just 7 body locations, and I've got 50 data points. So let me show you the CSV file. This is my data that I'm generating during my study, let's say. So I've got 50 data points. The IDs of those data points range from 1 to 50. So that's just an ID column. And here I've sorted these by body location, okay? So in this particular data set, I have 8 occurrences where I had something having to do with neck. Let's say neck pain, for lack of a better word. Let's say this is a neurological study of some sort. So 8 occurrences for the neck. For the right hand, I think I have 3 occurrences. For the left hand, 5 occurrences, and the like. So that's all my data. And that's all the data I was given. But in my table file, where I have the X and Y coordinates corresponding to each of these body parts, what I did was I did a little Excel operation, which brought the X and Y coordinates corresponding to these body parts into my CSV file. So this is the CSV file from which I am generating the scatter plot that I'm going to show on the human body here. So remember, we've got 8 occurrences for the neck as an example. Okay, so here we have 8 occurrences at the neck. Now, this looks like it's only 1 data point to me, and this happens quite a bit in when you have categorical or well, if you have chart that have very discrete occurrence locations. This is actually a pretty common use case where you have many dots, many occurrences of data, all at exactly the same point. So they all look as if, hey, this is just a single point. It is a single point, but it's got 8 occurrences in it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you ways where you can tease out more information about this data here. And Flow has several ways that you can divulge that there are multiple data points actually at this spot. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, as I'm going on, please feel free to interrupt me. So my next step, I'm going to do something here. I'm going to use an additional dimension. These happen to be stacks to show occurrences at each body location. So if I look at the definition of this particular scatterplot, I find that I've got my X coordinate, I've got my Y coordinate, that's this and this, okay? I am, on this particular chart, I'm using an additional dimension to provide my Z coordinate in the way that we've done it here. And what I'm using an additional dimension type of chart, which is called stacks. And basically what this does is it stacks the dots one on top of each other, okay? Now the spacing between the dots, I made that 0.022, and my dot size, I think, is 0.02 in size, okay? So, you know, I have just a tiny amount of space in between each dot, and I've got them stacked so you can see how many dots are occurring at each of these body locations, okay? Let's see. So one of the settings here is for these stacks, you can identify what the direction of the stacking of the dots is, and I've said, hey, stack these dots in the depth direction. So here, if I go back to my data, actually, it looks like I've got like 18 items here on my neck. Let me just go back and just check it, to take a quick look at this data, and we should be able to see 18 occurrences of neck pain. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let me see, maybe I didn't, I think I have. Oh yeah, here's some additional occurrences of neck. So, you know, I wasn't quite right earlier where I said I had sorted them by the location. I hadn't strictly done that. So anyway, there are 18 occurrences of neck pain on this chart. So this chart, you know, shows a way where you can see the occurrences of neck pain on this chart of the human body. So the XY axis places the event on the human body, and the stacks, part of the scatter plot, shows the number of occurrences. So I'm going to go to another alternative way where we can present the same kind of information. Going to the next step. This is similar, except I've got my X and Y axis as before, but here I'm using a different type of dispersion mechanism to show my numbers of dots here. So instead of stacking the dots and having them coming out of the chart at me, what I'm doing is I'm just dispersing these dots so they're in the general area. So let me go here and show you how I've done that. Here is my additional. Oh, what was that, Jane?
Can I just ask a quick question?
Oh, sure.
Let's say this was for pain and you also had a column that said like intensity where they scaled it. Mm-hmm. If you changed sizes to like scaled values, would that then make your dots like the size of the intensity of pain?
Oh yeah, that would be a very good technique here. You could scale the dot size based on the intensity of pain. You could also change the color. So if you wanted to have intense pain red and very dull pain blue or something, you could use color on that. Yeah, I haven't done that in that example, but that would be a really good thing to do. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so here, instead of using stacks, I'm using what we call random bubble clusters. And what random bubble clusters do is it takes the occurrences of these 18 dots that are at the same location on the neck, and it uses an algorithm to kind of disperse these dots in the same area, but just so you can see kind of qualitatively, quantitatively, let's say, how many dots are at that location. So that is random bubble clusters. This session today is not an in-depth discussion of all the additional dimensions that are available, but we will be having a session on that in the next 5 or 6 weeks, I think. So anyway, this is another way of showing how many occurrences of pain are at these various body locations in my data set. Okay. Now, a third, and this is a very good way, unless the numbers are absolutely huge, the numbers of events in your study, in which case there might just be so many dots. It just looks like a big morass. So let me show you a third way. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to go to the next step. And here what I've done is I've got a different data set. What I've done here is I've done an intermediate step outside of flow, actually, although I could do it inside flow also, where I've identified the body location and the occurrence count. I've summarized it. And this is my familiar XY component that I'm getting from my table lookup file. So here I see the 18 occurrences on the neck. I see 8 occurrences on the left foot, 5 occurrences on the left hand, and the like. So what I've done here is I've summarized this data. And now what I've done is I've used a regular XYZ scatter plot, which is probably more familiar to you, where I've got my x-axis, my y-axis, and then the z-axis is the occurrences count. So this is an extremely straightforward scatter plot rather than one that uses the additional dimensions we had talked about before. So this is another way that describes exactly the same, presents exactly the same data. Okay. Okay, so what I've done here is I've shown you 3 ways. They're all variations of scatter plots of showing events on this various parts of the human body. Before I get to my second example, any questions on this one?
I guess my big question is just, how did you have to kind of already know the coordinates of your image, and then like I guess it's more on the input data, but like, how did you know the coordinates of your image and then also be able to like put the occurrence on those? Like, did you just say, here's the image, I'm going to figure out what the X and Y coordinates of that image is, and then fill that data into your other data set?
Exactly. What I did is I got my image and I put that on, I'm way back at step 3 here. I got my image here, which was on step 2, and I put it on to step, I copied it. It's now it's on step 3. And then what I did is I overlaid a grid here where I just arbitrarily, I measured this, and I saw that the dimensions of this chart were in the proportions of 200 by 208. So, what I did is I got a grid, I overlaid that on my image, and then I said for my top of my head, I just queried what the XY coordinate of that was, and it was 108 and 206. Or excuse me, I entered that, I guessed at what it was, just looking at the chart here, and then I entered that into my CSV file. Then I fed in the CSV file, which made all these dots appear on the body. And then I queried, okay, what is the XY coordinate that I put in there for that body location? So this is the hardest part of the project, actually, was setting this up. Okay. So, okay. That's the technique I used. And it turns on this one, I had 45 data points. It took me a little while to set it up, but it wasn't bad. Okay, now the next one is more of a challenge in that area. The technique I'm using on this next use case is pretty much exactly the same, but the volumes of locations are quite a bit different. So here I'm going to go to my drop-in scatter plot on image 2. Okay. And I'm going to bring this one into the edit mode also. Very similar use case, except here I've got an arena. Okay. This is actually a sports stadium in the US. I think this is Heinz Field, which is in Pittsburgh, I think. So, you know, the same kind of challenge, right? I've got sections, and in this, these are sections of the stadium. And what I want to do is I'm going to have some sort of application that maybe is going to analyze revenue or revenue versus cost for these different sections or attendance. You know, there's any number of interesting metrics that could be studied here. So here's my starting image. Okay. Here is my overlay grid. You know, what I did is I set this up. So now I'm still on this, I'm on a scale of 0 to 200, where 0, 0 is down here, 200, 200 is up here. And what I did is I put in a rectangular grid where I just divided this into, I think it was 100 sections, or 100 dots going each direction. And I did exactly the same thing. So that I did with the Leonardo case, except here, let me show you what this data set looks like here. So here I have my x-axis is going from 0 to 200. My y-axis is going from 0 to 200 in steps of 2. So I have 10,000, turns out there's 10,100 data points in this grid that I'm showing, okay? So I'm just gonna, and this is just an arbitrary value. I just named it whatever I just gave it an arbitrary name. So this is my grid. So now the next thing I need to do is let's get the section coordinates defined for each of these. So what I did is I did this manually, actually. It must be a machine way of doing it too, but I did this manually. And what I did is for each section, you know, I went into the section and I just chose a dot here. 7846 corresponds to section 143. So I did this manually, and I built up a kind of modestly sized CSV file. Let's remember 143. Okay. So here's my section. And so I build up this. Let's see, let me find section 143 here. 78 by 44 was the XY that I put in there, and I got that off the chart. So this one took me a little while to build. I think this one took me more than an hour, I think, of careful pointing and clicking and identifying, you know, where the dots just look best to display on these various sections. And where it got a little strange was these tiny little sections. You know, I had to be careful about where I put my dots so that I wouldn't obliterate the section number with the placement of the dot and things like that. And you can see in here, there are a few places where I didn't quite get it in a totally smooth curve. Like here, you know, this dot should actually be a little bit to the right, but you know, that's just setup tweaking that I needed to do. So once I had this established though, now for each section, I can do a query here and I can see what the XY coordinate is. So this section here, 9130 is my XY coordinate. This is on the level 1 of the stadium. The color code is orange. I put that in there too. And the section is 124. So I think there's more than 200 sections here. I set each of them up in the same way. And now once I've got this done, then if I get some data, I can actually use the section number to identify these data points and to display data accordingly. So on this next step, I didn't have any real data, so I just put in a little bit of artificial data so I could show the data points. And the color I chose for my dots is the same as the background color of the section. And I think phase 2 of this project, I'll probably color the dots a little differently, so just so they're a bit more visible. But anyway, you can see here as I maneuver my camera position here, there is data for each of these sections. It's not very adventuresome data yet, and it's not real data, but it is. This proves the point that I can actually populate this kind of a stadium, and I can show data on top of it. Okay, and it all has to do with setting up the reference X, coordinating X, Y along with the section number. So let's see, if I show my data set here. Yeah, let's see, the section number, this is what I put in. And then these are lookup values here from my lookup table and the like. And I just put in a column here that had to do with some artificial data for each of those sections. So exactly the same technique, more complex because there's more locations and just more going on here than on that Leonardo drawing. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, so now if you have to do a stadium application, at least this might be a start. My third use case, a little different. This one's a map. And let me show you, let me bring it up. This is image number 3. Bring this into edit mode also. Okay, this is an example where I'm using latitude and longitude to generate a scatter plot on an image of a map. Okay, now flow maps, if you take a real map within flow, the latitude and longitude are all built into the map, and you don't have to go through much manipulation to use a flow map. But let's say if we don't have a map of a section of a city, let's say, like here's the metro area for Washington, D.C. What I wanted to do is identify several locations of properties. And what I wanted to do is put those on the map of Washington, D.C., but I didn't have a map. A digital map of the DC area. All I had was this image. So basically, what we did on this is we set up the map. Let me reset my camera position here. Whoops. Oh, okay. Actually, this is an interesting reset. Here we go, right here. We set this up so it's XY oriented also. So on here, we had to do a little bit of study. Sierra and we worked on this jointly. What we did is we identified 3 or 4 locations on this map for which we knew what the latitude and longitude were. And then what we were able to do is identify what the latitude here is at the lower left-hand corner, latitude and longitude. And we did that for each of the 4 corners. Once we had that done, then if we could identify the latitude and longitude of let's say a building or a property or whatever inside this metro area, we could indeed place it on the map because we already knew what the endpoints of this rectangular space were regarding latitude and longitude. So if we have a latitude and longitude that lies within that space, we could place that dot on the particular map. So in this case, we had 3 properties, let's say, that were in Bethesda, Maryland, and 12 properties in the DC, a couple in Arlington, a couple in Alexandria, which are suburbs of Washington, DC. So if we take a look at the CSV file here, property 1 through property 18, these are the latitude and longitudes that we got for those properties. And I think we got these latitude and longitudes out of a Google latitude longitude lookup, where we could put in the address or whatever, and then we could find the latitude and longitude. This is slightly artificial data. So we also put in here the metro area in case we wanted to put other cities like New York or Baltimore or whatever into the same database. This is just a metric that has to do with each of these properties. Maybe it's the size of the property or whatever. And this is just this is a kind of a location 1 through 18. It just corresponds to this here. I think I used this when I was putting in some random numbers to generate some random data having to do with these points. So anyway, so with this, as long as I have the latitude and longitude for the property, I can place it on this map, image of the map, because when I define my scatter plot over here, the width ranges from minus 77.2098, that's the latitude here, to minus 76.8617, that's the latitude here. So latitude is always increasing as you go from east to west. So that's why the maximum range here is well, these are negative numbers. So this is indeed a larger number. Okay. So anyway, this represents the latitudes for my far X coordinate and my leftmost X coordinate and my rightmost X coordinate. On the height range, this corresponds to 38.7803 degrees longitude. Let's see. Maybe that's latitude. Actually, no, I've got my longitude and latitude exactly reversed. Sorry about that. The first is longitude, minus 77 to minus 76 longitude. That's along the x-axis, and latitude, I'm sorry, is along the y-axis here. And that's how I've defined it here in my scatter plot. Longitude, x-axis, latitude, y-axis. So here my minimum latitude is 38.78 degrees, and my maximum is 39.00 degrees. So once I have my scatter plot set up, so these are the extremes ranges on my chart, then everything inside the chart in terms of longitude and latitude maps perfectly. So that's how that was set up. And it turns out there are a couple of different ways you can do this within Flow. Our first rendition of this chart, what we did is we just made this a 2D scatter plot where we had latitude, longitude, X versus Y. And then what we did is we used an additional dimension, which is called a micro 3D scatter plot, to do a depth offset. So we had the map looking at us like this. Then we did a depth offset, which is coming toward us according to the size of the units. Then there were a couple other configuration things we did. And the net result was we were able to generate this particular map. So the next step here, I'm just going to show a slight variation of this. On the next step, what we did here is we used, let's see, we used more of a standard XYZ method of doing this. So X is the longitude, Y is the latitude, and Z is the units. It turned out this one was a little bit more difficult just to manipulate, rather than the one where we had the XY with the additional dimension being the offset. But it worked. It came out fine. It was just a little bit more difficult to deal with for reasons I won't get into this particular topic. But so when you're doing these 3D scatter plots on images, you usually have some choices as to what your strategy is going to be. And what we did here is we just wanted to see if both of these came out with exactly the same result, and both approaches turned out fine, okay, with very similar settings. Okay, so that's a mouthful. So my message here is, if you ever have a need where you need to display data onto an image, you can do that. You just have to be careful about making sure that your X and Y coordinates established for the image are consistent and give you the result that you want. Okay.
Can you manipulate an image at all? Like, similar to in PowerPoint where you could like blur the edges, or I don't know, like, is there abilities to manipulate the actual?
Yeah, there's some manipulation you can do. Like here, I'm focused here on the definition of the image. Or actually, let me just go back here to the very first step. No, I'll go to the second step. It's just a little bit larger, able to see it better. So here's my image. Okay, I can size it. Like if I want to make that image larger, like that's easily done. Okay. Okay. There are other things I can do about it. I can make it so it's always facing the camera. So if I change my camera position, the image is always facing the camera. Probably not a good idea in this particular application, but optimized for clean edge rendering. Actually, you know, I'm not even sure what that is. Maybe Michael, if you're on here, if you could let us know what some of the other things having to do with images, maybe that you've used in the past that might address Jane's question.
Yeah, so most of the edits that I think you're looking for, such as like blending or making it so the edges are like less distinct and more blend into the scene around it, I would do is not in Flow. I don't think it's not in our near-term roadmap, but there's a lot of editing softwares for photos, and just a simple filter probably will apply. The one thing that we do have that's actually more recent are blending options. So these are similar to blending options that you would see in Photoshop for blending layers together. And so you have normal blending, additive, subtractive, and multiplying. So you could actually put images on top of one another in a whatever way you're trying to do. And that's one way you can actually add sort of these layers in and do some kind of cool things. So that's actually much newer, but the actual editing of the image or manipulation of the image has to be done outside of Flow.
Yeah, and I think there are, from what I've heard, I think there are some medical application implications of doing these kinds of blendings and layering that Michael was describing.
Right. Yeah, it's actually for a microscopy projects where they're layering over dyes of different cells, and that's where it came from. So they're much more exacting with the science of how we have to do all that. So it's pretty cool to see, actually.
Good. Hey, thanks, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jane. So did that answer that part of your question? Or was there any more that you wanted to know about that?
No, that's good to know. I think, you just need to know that you have to import it in the look that you kind of want it to be.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And on that front, I will say transparency does work quite nicely for images. So instead of black, the transparent sort of blends into the background, especially if you do faded edges, it really blends in quite nicely. And then even just with some of the textures we've started been playing with a little bit. Sorry, I'm not going to go on a tangent. Sorry, I'll stop. Go back to you, Paul.
Okay. Actually, no, as long as I have this particular chart up here and I'm looking at the image, all the data objects in Flow, whether it's a swarm or an image or a text object, down at the bottom of the control panel corresponding to that object, here I'm looking at image number 3, okay? Down at the bottom, we always have a position, rotation, and scale factors. So these are the areas, it's very consistent for every type of object, that allow you to do certain types of things. Like scaling, if I wanted to make this image a fifth the size of it is right now, I can scale it right here to 0.2. I can be very precise about how my scaling is. So that's scaling. Also, if I want to be kind of precise in the way I position an image on a chart, I can use this. I can use this control here to scroll it to the right. Scroll it to the left. Notice my image is scrolling. My data is not following along, okay? Because here, we do decompose the way you can scale both the data and the map. Here, you don't want these to get out of sync, but if you needed to change the positions, you can change this either left, right, up, down, or far and close, okay? And also, there's a concept of rotation here. So on this particular chart, I have it rotated 90 degrees when we first viewed this step. If I can always rotate it by a lesser amount or whatever, so these are good. These are very good controls to know about. And it's quite frequently you'll find yourself in a position where, hey, I just need to adjust this a little bit, or I need to rotate it in a certain way. And these give you precise control over those kinds of placement and rotational kinds of things for all the data objects. This one here, I'm just looking at image, but text and swarms have exactly the same kinds of positioning capabilities, always down at the far bottom of the charts, or the definition pane, I should say.
And then,
okay, let's see. At this point,
Bill, do you mind if I just add one more thing to what you just showed?
Sure.
This is a little bit more advanced, and I'd recommend only doing this at sort of once you have things more set, is we actually have something called groups. And so to your point on needing to rotate or move scaled objects both at the same time, especially when you have lots of objects that are sort of all in the right spot, you want to bring them all together. And so we have something called groups. And so if you add a group, and this is only available underneath advanced, I'll note, and I don't know why your map changed.
well, let's see.
I guess back on the swarm definition.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think all I did here is I checked group here.
Yeah, if you go back to the swarm definition, or sorry, the map, and it's just change the map.
The image.
Minus, yeah, or the image. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Looks like the position just didn't.
Yeah, actually, you know what? Let me transit. Let me come back into this flow here.
Okay.
Real quick here.
So there's just one sort of, not trick, but thing that can trick you up or trip you up. And let's see if we get.
Okay, so I'm back to where I was originally with this. Okay. Do you want to define a group?
Yes, let's add a group.
Okay.
So by default, groups are blank. And the most important thing is that the group, think of it as like this giant box, and then you're basically adding things into it. But that giant box has to have a position to start. And that position to start should be at 0, 0, 0, which it does by default here. But if for whatever reason it's off, if it's off like up here, then what's going to happen is it's going to move the object to the box. And that actually is why I say don't save your thing and then try this, because this can cause issues that are frustrating. But when you have it here and it's set in the right position, then you can add the items into it. So if you click add item, you can essentially add the image and the swarm. So if you click on that little box just above the remove button, there's a black entry box below items. Yep. So just below that, there should be a little, yeah, right there.
Okay. Oh, got it here. Right. Okay. Yeah.
So if you click there, that should show you all the objects, and you can essentially select image and swarm.
Okay, I'm going to select image 3, which is this one here. Okay, did that.
And we'll add item, and then we'll add the swarm. So down just a little bit, same sort of black area right above the remove.
It's hard to see, isn't it? Okay, here we go. And I'm going to, this is swarm number 5. Okay, great.
Yeah, and I think you might have replaced the one that was there before. Did you see there's a box right underneath the one you just have there?
Oh, I see. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one's for the image. Okay, great.
Yeah, so if you make that one the image.
Great. Okay, got it.
Perfect. So now these are essentially in the same group. And so much like the objects have properties, the group can have properties too. And so now when you move, so now as he's moving the group, it is moving the objects, which is the swarm and the map. And it's not showing that the connections is moving, but I'm pretty positive that will update once you save and refresh, I think, or if you go back a step and forward a step.
What I'm going to do
it's
here,
just a legacy.
I'm just going to save and refresh real quick here.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll probably have a session on groups here in the not too distant future. Just,
It's a sensitive topic.
oh, the connections did not move.
Okay, that's new. You can
Yeah.
actually add the connections into the swarm definition as well, but it shouldn't have to. So I will check on that. So this is a good time to say that this is why groups is in the advanced section and still not being taught yet, because there are some nuances to it. But just to call it out that it is there, and the one sort of other tricky thing about them is visibility, that if you are to turn off visibility of that group, it will essentially turn off visibility for all of the objects as well. And so that's another way to turn on and off everything if you want to quickly turn on and off things. But
yeah, so I found out what the issue was here, Michael. You have to also add the connections to the group. So now I've got this, so everything's moving as one nice group now, including the connections.
And you can scale it as well. Scale up, scale down is sometimes nice too. And,
so groups will be that'll be an interesting topic, and it certainly makes the kinds of operation we're doing here easier. So let's see. At this point, we usually open this up for questions. I've got a few more minutes. I can certainly go to the top of the hour. So Andrea, Ram, Jane, any other questions on any topic whatsoever?
No, it's all clear for me.
Oh, what was that?
It's all clear. I don't have any question.
Oh, good. Okay, thanks, Andrea.
I have an unrelated question, but I'll let Ram go first.
Oh yeah, I have on my side, I have a few questions like at a more high level. But yeah, mine are going to be a series of questions. Jane, you could probably go ahead.
Okay, I don't remember. Again, I'm still learning your terminology, but like when you click on a dot and you get the like metadata information, when you originally populate that information, like you get to decide what, you don't necessarily have every column show up, right? So you say like, I want these 3 columns to be talked about when you touch on a point. I originally didn't put in like brief labels of them. And I think that's the preface. And I was just trying to figure out it's an overlay. So that's how you decide what they're called. Oh, it's under interactions and overlay, and that's where I could.
Yes, right. And here, what I'm doing is I'm putting in the preface. It doesn't have to be exactly the same name as the field. So, what I could do is I could put a preface of property and number, maybe, just something like that. And what I'm going to do here is okay. And now when I click on this, I have property here and the number of units or whatever. So yeah, that is set through the interaction section. It's a swarm attribute. So click on the swarm, come over here and choose your interactions. And then there are several different types of pop-ups you can do. I like to use the overlay pop-up, which always puts my information in a predictable spot on the screen. You can also, if I wanted to, I could make this a 3D pop-up so the data would appear in the 3D space itself. So lots of options there. And this is a on select. That means I have to click on the dot to make the item appear. If this were a rollover pop-up, as soon as I rolled over the dot, it would pop up with the images or what the data is. Yeah, so there's several things in this interactions section, and that is another topic that we'll be addressing at some point.
That's great. I couldn't figure out how to re-edit it, but now it's figured it out.
Yeah, it's that select columns is the trick, and I think there's also another button at the top called Format Data on top of the swarm, but those both essentially edit the same thing, which is this preface text, trailing text, the formatting of what type of object or type of number it is. And then you can also do rounding and precision, which we can get into. But yeah, so there's actually quite a lot going on in those dialog boxes. So it's pretty.
So over here, and these are the columns in your CSV file. There's one button here for each column in your CSV file, so you can put any number. You can expose any number of these columns, fields in your pop-up. Okay, Ram. Hey, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, this was a great demonstration. Thank you, Bill. I'm really, I mean, ever since I saw this product, I was very excited because this is one of the few products that I've seen where there's capability of 3D visualization. So, I mainly do Python developing. So this is in a browser, and it's a browser-based application. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah, this is a software as a service product. So it's accessed through the internet from anywhere. And we use Amazon Web Services as our web server for serving this application out to the internet.
What kind of data files do you guys usually take in? Is it just CSVs, or is there more flexibility there?
Yeah, right now it's CSVs. That's kind of ubiquitous. We also have direct integration with Google Sheets. And as time goes on, we're going to have more direct types of integration with other data sources. We have a project that's under development right now where we're able to do SQL types of queries into an external database. We have that. We've done that for a couple of customers on kind of a special project basis, and we're in the process of making that more ubiquitously available to all our customers. So, right now it's CSV files or Google Sheets files. If you'd asked me the question maybe 4 months from now, I'll say, hey, those plus a bunch of other things. So we got about a third of our engineering group right now working on data integration activities of one sort or another.
Right. Awesome. So do you guys have, sorry, these might be a little like these questions might be a little like stupid, but you've created, let's say you've created these kind of flows. Is there an ability for a dashboard, right? Like a business intelligence dashboard that you're able to present?
Yeah, Michael, you want to take that?
Sure. So there's definitely been a lot of customers that have created more of a dashboard-like flow, I would call it. And this actually maybe goes more to the point of a lot of where we're going actually with why we're doing these deeper data integrations and actually we're building out variables. Is because we want people to be able to click on a dot and expand that out and be able to drill into information in almost a infinite series, if you could imagine. So in that sense, I think that's where we ultimately sort of want to end up. And I don't think that answered your question though. Sorry, what was your specific question again? I feel like I did not try.
Yeah, if there is a dashboard, so like in a presentation, like you mentioned, let's say you present a map like this, but then you want to target a specific variable and look into that because of the audience, right?
Right. Yeah, and actually, it's funny you mentioned that because back in the very beginning days of Flow, we actually didn't even have a next or back button. It was sort of a choose your own adventure a little bit, where as you click into something, you could basically go anywhere you wanted. And we mainly do that through buttons. So you do have the ability to create a button and that you can basically assign any action to occur to move someone along. But I'd say we haven't done that as much. And I will say that from our experience, the more dashboard type use cases just have a little harder time getting that traction. If you can use that dashboard and tell some stories with it, then that really starts to take off, or what we've seen a lot of people have more success. But when it was just for the analysis purpose only, things started to break down a little bit, just from our experience. So that said, I'd say it's something we're probably less ideal for in terms of just a true BI dashboard tool.
Right.
But that said, we're building out more and more of those capabilities. I just don't want to mislead you and try to say we can, you can build a whole BI dashboard, but I do think that the storytelling aspect of it is the thing that sort of needs to come out first, and then we can add in more layers. And as we build more and more of these projects, they are becoming more BI tool like.
Yeah, so Ram, as we've been chatting here, what I did is I went out into our featured flows and I brought up a flow which has to do with the Texas power outage that happened a little bit more than a year ago. And this is kind of Michael wrote this flow several months ago, and it does have kind of a dashboardy component to it. But as he said, it's mostly the data storytelling, which kind of gave rise to the dashboard rather than vice versa. So on this particular chart, we're following temperature on several days in February of 2021. And we're looking at demand for electricity and supply for electricity and cost of electricity during that time. So very interesting story. And you can go out onto our featured flows page and find this along with about 25 other flows. So this one strikes me as having more of a dashboard kind of look and feel than a lot of our other flows. So, so in any case, it's very doable to put many different charts all on the same flow.
Got it. And then I had one last thing. I saw a lot of what's it called? Like the flows presented in AR. So how does that, like, what currently is the way you would do this?
Yeah, so I'll go through that tomorrow, actually. So tomorrow's lesson is going to be on how to create those AR videos. So I'll go way more in depth, but the high level view is that this is all just a web app, which makes it accessible on all devices. So going into a meeting like what Bill's doing here, all we have to do is start a meeting. And when you start that meeting, you can then have other people join the meeting. And so you can join from your cell phone or a headset, any device. And basically you are in the same virtual space, and that then when you record, you are recording that same virtual space. And so that probably doesn't make as much sense without some visuals to go along with it. But the quick answer is that you just go to the same URL as you do on the phone, as you do on the headset, and you just record from there. It's actually pretty straightforward once you see it. But there's no magic to it. It's just a screen recording, actually.
Gotcha. And could you, I'm wondering, like for the depth and everything to be calculated, do you have to have a certain device, like the new iPhone, or can you do this from like a webcam as well, or is there any limitations there?
Yeah, so you cannot do it from a webcam. Pretty much it's cell phones that are running the WebXR spec, which is becoming more and more adopted, and it's awesome to see. So by default, all Android phones work with Chrome in AR mode, so you don't have to do anything, and that will work fine. On iPhones, Safari is building out their WebXR supports, but in the meantime, there's a Mozilla browser. It's called WebXR browser, which we will point you to if you click on AR in Safari, it will actually point you to that application. And so that's what's necessary on iPhone or on Apple phones. And then on Oculus, the Oculus browser is XR supported. Microsoft Edge is WebXR supported, including on the HoloLens. So even on the HoloLens 2, you can open up the web browser and go into immersive mode which is really cool,
wow.
as well as the Helio browser on the Magic Leap. So it's really cool to see the browser really becoming more of a first-class app on all of these immersive devices, because I think the thing we hear over and over is, that you can't have an experience be only on a headset, because there's just not enough people that will see it. Basically, you need to be able to reach them through multiple means, and by far the headsets, it's really awesome. But you have to meet people where they're at and bring them to that spot, not sort of throw them in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, these AR videos, we're really thrilled that this is getting more exposure around the world with our customers. So these AR videos are popping up from places from France to Australia where users are making these AR videos. So.
Yeah, I mean that's one of my biggest interests, because it brings no pun intended, but another dimension to these presentations, and it's very exciting for me to think about the possibilities of this, when people are able to manipulate the data in front of them. I think that'd be excellent. That would be amazing.
Oh, I love how you're thinking. Yeah, it's yeah, you exactly see it. We're in many ways we're trying to make all the movies practical. So we've seen all of these in movies, and in many ways we are trying to make it real and practical today. So now every time I watch a movie where they show these 3D animations, they're just touching random stuff, I always give them I'm a little more critical of their designs.
That's amazing.
Yeah, as you get more into this, Ram, and if you want additional information, send me an email. I'm at bill@flow.gl.
Okay.
Maybe I'll put that in the chat just so you have it. And we've got access to information, and we're trying to put as much information as we can in our help center too. But if you have a question or whatever, shoot me an email. Either myself or somebody will reply to you with an answer of some sort, or you can enter an issue into our help center.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Can I ask one or two more questions? They're a little more specific to just like what the technical things are, but I also know if you have to leave, that's fine too. So I know that you can.
I was going to say, I can stay a few more minutes. I don't know what your schedule is, Michael.
I'm okay.
Okay, great. Okay, Jane.
So I know that you can change the color scheme by categorical variables, but is there a way to put a legend on there so people know what those categorical variables are? Or do you just have to like add that as a text box?
No, actually legends are quite commonly done in our flows. Let me see if I can just find one here real quick for you. I'll just show you basically how it's done. I'm going to go to my flows. Let me find one of my training flows here.
While Bill's pulling that up, it is definitely something we've noted and we're working on. It's actually one of the first use cases of variables is actually this, where all we want to do is take the flow you built and look at what are the unique values, and then create a second swarm that you can basically create the legend with. And what we're hoping to do with that is that what's a little different is that when you select on that legend, even though it's a separate swarm, it can link back to the first swarm. So when you click on that one, and it will highlight on the other, and vice versa. And so there's actually a lot of powerful things you can start to do with that. More to come, but I'd say the workaround, or not the workaround, but the thing we mostly do, or at least I do, is a lot of text, and then you match the color for now. But that is something we're definitely going to be addressing, because it's kind of a little bit of a pain right now.
Yeah, I think I know exactly where to go here to give you an example of this. This is one of my training flows. I think, yeah, here we go. Yeah, so this is a training flow. In the very last step, I've actually done a lot of colorization on a map in a particular way. And what I've done here is I've put in this legend here, which shows the top 10 most populous countries in the world are colored red. The next 10 are colored orange. The next 20 are colored green and the like. So, what I did here is I put this legend in, and the legend is basically a tiny little swarm. Like I'll show you the CSV file corresponding to this legend here. It's just the label, the country group 1 to 10, 10, 11 to 20. This is the color. This is the actual hex code of the color. And this is a value 54321. And what this does is it orders these. So if I have this defined as a XY scatter plot, and this is my Y axis, then these colors these groups are going to line up where this will be at the 5 position, 4, 3, 2, 1. So now let me go back to the chart. This is how it shows up on here. So I set this up as an XY scatter plot with values along the Y-axis. And then what I did is I hid the Y-axis. So all of a sudden this legend is just hanging out there in space by itself. So it's a tiny little swarm. And as time goes on, we're going to have ways of auto-constructing these swarms. That's a project, or these legends. It's a project going in our engineering group right now.
So that I totally get how to do that. That makes sense. But is there a way like to take your full data set that isn't already condensed into those like clear categories and say, because like it already knows what the categories are, or is there not a way to auto?
I can show one way. I don't know if we've really shown this way, but it's possible, but we're sort of waiting on the next iteration of variables to really proclaim sort of the suggested way to do it. But one way you could do it is that here what I'm doing is I'm loading, let me make this a little bigger so you can see. So this is 10,000 cities. And so this data set contains basically city, a bunch of basic data like that. And so what you can do is if you were to group this by dragging up city as an example, actually is city the right? I probably shouldn't do city. Let me do continents. So I'm going to have a legend for continent because I'll have all the colors for the different continents. That by grouping it by continents, I essentially have this hierarchy that shows the quote unquote legend. And so I can create a snapshot, and I could actually probably call that snapshot legends. And now it's going to be, so now if I'm going to create a second swarm, and on the second swarm, I'm going to select that snapshot. So this first one doesn't have the snapshot. I'll turn that one off. And then the second one does have the snapshot on. And so now I'm going to look at, or put a scatter plot in, and I'm going to look at the countries, or not countries, sorry, continents, which is the thing we selected. And the colors, I believe we're going to apply a color scheme to the continents. So just keep it like that. Let me make these dots way bigger. So we can see the colors next to them. And I personally like using labels as opposed to the axes lines. So I can do that by turning off the height axis and turning on labels to then show the continents. And from there, basically I've basically created a label really sort of quickly. The one caveat I will quickly make, just in case you run into it, is that sometimes the ordering can be the issue, because if this order is different than the order of the other one, the colors sometimes can mess up, and that's why you often see us hard coding the color into the legend. So these are all things we definitely are aware of and are trying to not make too complicated sounding, but you can see that the primitive objects are there. It's just, we have a few things to finish up to really get legends to be really simple. we were very close to having just a legend button, and we pulled back on that because we really wanted variables because variables really unlocks quite a lot of power to do legends and way more things. So it's a little bigger effort, but if you guys can be a little patient, we'll have something pretty good there.
Awesome. That totally makes sense. I think I could play around with that. And I didn't really realize the drag and drop aspect of making a snapshot, and that's awesome. So
yeah, snapshots are definitely, and I'm going to publish one. Let me just show this real quick. I'm going to probably put this out this week, I think. But I think it's actually a really good example of using snapshots because it's one data set. But the way I'm using the snapshots is actually pretty effective. And let me just jump over ahead here. So there's one data set, but what I've done is created a snapshot for basically the renewable resources, and then another snapshot for the fossil fuels. And I did that because I wanted them both to pull from the same data sets, but to show graphically a little differently, one on top and the one on the bottom. So they're actually two different swarms here for how we did it. So anyways, I think this could be a good example of like, how to set up and use different use the data table here, or the AG grid to manipulate and do aggregation and stuff. And we're definitely going to be building more into this. There's quite a lot you can do with aggregation, and yeah, there's a lot more you can do there. But yeah, hopefully that addresses your question.
yeah, that's great. That's super awesome. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah, so I gotta make sure to put this one out there I might clean it up a little bit more and then try to post it.
How about if we say one more question that I know I've got to host another meeting at 8:30 Pacific here, but any final question? Okay, I've got a final answer, and that is, hey, thanks a lot for everybody coming. And we have these sessions twice a week. You're always welcome to join us. There's a different focused topic, and then followed by Q&A like we've done here today. So thanks for all your good questions, by the way. It gave us a good reason to talk about various features of our product. So yeah, our best wishes to you on your adventures with Flow. I think you're going to find it to be an interesting endeavor. And if there's any way we can help you, just shoot us some emails or see us on the Help Center. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.